The room was smaller than he expected. White walls, gray carpet, a glass table that reflected the overhead light in clean, hard lines. There were 6 men already seated when Jackson Browne walked in. They wore suits. They smiled. One of them stood to shake his hand. The others stayed seated. The door closed behind him with a soft click that felt louder than it should have. It was late May in 1977. Los Angeles. The music industry was exploding. Fleetwood Mac's Rumors was selling faster than anything anyone had ever seen. The Eagles were gods. Linda Ronstadt was untouchable. And Jackson Browne, at 28 years old, was right there with them. His last album, The Pretender, had gone platinum. His songs were on every radio station. His face was on magazine covers. He was the sound of longing, of late-night highways, of hearts that ached quietly in the dark. People loved him. The industry loved him more. But this meeting wasn't about love. It was about control. One of the men slid a folder across the table, thick, bound. The words "exclusive recording agreement" printed across the top in bold black letters. Jackson didn't reach for it right away, he just looked at it. The man who had slid it over smiled again. His teeth were very white. "This is everything you've been working toward," the man said. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, 7 albums. Full creative support. Marketing budget like you've never seen. Distribution across every major market. You'll be bigger than Dylan, bigger than Springsteen. This is the deal everyone dreams about. Jackson nodded slowly. He still didn't touch the folder. "We just need your signature," another man said from the far end of the table. Older, graying at the temples. His voice had weight. Today, if possible. Jackson finally reached forward and opened the folder. The pages were dense. Legal language. Clauses. Subclauses. Percentages. Rights. Ownership. He flipped through slowly. No one spoke. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the soft rustle of paper. Then he stopped. His finger rested on a paragraph halfway down page 17. He read it twice. Then he looked up. "This says you own the masters," he said quietly. "That's standard," the first man said. His smile didn't falter. Every major label does it. "You keep the royalties, we keep the rights. It's how the industry works." Jackson looked back down at the page. His jaw tightened just barely. "For how long?" "Perpetuity," the older man said. He said it like it was nothing, like it was a formality. "But you'll make more money than you know what to do with. Trust me, this is the best deal you're going to get." Jackson closed the folder. He didn't push it back across the table. He just sat there, looking at it. The men waited. One of them checked his watch. Another poured himself water from a glass pitcher. The sound of the water hitting the glass was too loud. "I need time," Jackson said. "We don't have time," the older man said. His tone shifted, just a little. "We've got 3 other artists waiting for this slot. If you walk out of here without signing, we move on. That's just reality." Jackson looked at him, didn't blink, didn't look away. "Then you move on." The room changed. The air got heavier. The smiles disappeared. One of the men leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Another tapped his pen against the table. The older man's face went cold. "You understand what you're walking away from?" he said. "I understand what I'm walking into," Jackson said. He stood up. No one else moved. He looked at each of them, one by one. Then he turned and walked toward the door. His hand was on the handle when the older man spoke again. "You won't work in this town again," he said. "Not with us. Not with anyone. We'll make sure of it." Jackson stopped. He didn't turn around. He stood there for 3 full seconds. Then he opened the door and walked out. The hallway outside was long and empty. His footsteps echoed on the tile. He could feel his heartbeat in his chest. His hands were steady, but his throat was tight. He didn't look back. By the time he reached his car, the word was already spreading. It didn't take long. The music industry in Los Angeles in 1977 was a small world. Everyone knew everyone. A lunch here, a phone call there, a quiet conversation at a party in the hills. Within 48 hours, every major label in the city knew that Jackson Browne had refused to sign. And more importantly, they knew why. The masters, the rights, the control. To most of them, it didn't make sense. Artists didn't own their masters. That wasn't how it worked. You made the music. The label owned it. You got paid. Everyone moved on. That was the deal. That was the system. It had been that way for decades. Why would anyone fight it? But Jackson wasn't fighting. He was just refusing to agree. His manager called him that same week. They met at a diner on Sunset. Vinyl booths. Coffee in heavy white mugs, the kind of place where you could sit for hours and no one bothered you. His manager looked tired. He ordered eggs. Didn't touch them. "They're serious," he said. "They're not going to let this go. You embarrassed them. And now they're telling everyone you're difficult. Unreliable. A risk." Jackson stirred his coffee. He hadn't slept much. "I'm not unreliable." "I know that," his manager said. "But they don't care. They're painting a picture. And once that picture's out there, it sticks. So what do I do?" His manager looked at him for a long time. Then he sighed. "You sign the next deal they offer. You apologize. You move forward." Jackson shook his head. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because it's mine," Jackson said. His voice was calm, steady. "The songs are mine. The recordings are mine. I wrote them. I lived them. I'm not handing them over forever just to stay in the game." His manager leaned back. He rubbed his face with both hands. "Then, you're out of the game." Jackson didn't answer. The silence between them stretched long. Outside the window, traffic moved in slow waves. Someone honked. A bus hissed to a stop. The world kept turning like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Jackson could feel it. A door closing, a bridge burning, a point of no return. His manager finally spoke again. His voice was quieter now, almost sad. "You know what happens next, right? They'll make calls. They'll spread the word. Every label, every promoter, every venue. They'll say you're trouble. They'll say you can't be trusted, and people will believe them. Because that's how it works. That's how they protect the system." Jackson looked down at his coffee. It was cold now. He hadn't taken a single sip. "I know. And you're still going to do this?" Jackson met his eyes. Didn't hesitate. "I don't have a choice." His manager shook his head slowly. "You always have a choice. Not this time," Jackson said. "Not with this." They sat in silence for another minute. Then his manager stood up. He pulled out his wallet, left a 20 on the table. "I can't help you with this," he said. "I wish I could. But I can't." Jackson nodded. "I understand." His manager walked toward the door, stopped, turned back. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think you're right. I just don't think it's going to matter." Then he was gone. Jackson sat there for another hour, watching people come and go, listening to the clatter of plates and the hum of conversation, trying to figure out what came next, trying not to think about how scared he was. 2 weeks later, he got a call from another label. Smaller, independent. They wanted to meet. They said they loved his work. They said they understood his concerns. They said they could work something out. Jackson drove to their office on a Tuesday afternoon. The building was older. The lobby smelled like carpet cleaner and old wood. The guy who met him at the door was young, maybe 30, wore jeans and a t-shirt, shook his hand like they were friends. They sat in a room with posters on the walls. Old albums, Hendrix, Joni, Miles. The guy smiled a lot, talked about art, about integrity, about how the industry was broken and they were trying to fix it. "We're different," he said. "We care about the music. We care about the artist. We're not like the big labels. We're not trying to own you." Jackson wanted to believe him. He really did. The guy seemed genuine. He talked about collaboration, about partnership, about building something real together. He poured Jackson a cup of coffee, offered him a donut from a box on the desk, acted like they were already on the same team. Then he pulled out a contract. Jackson read it, took his time, got to page 9. Same clause, different words, same result. He looked up. "You want the masters, too?" The guy's smile flickered. "Just for a second. Then it came back a little weaker. It's just for the first 3 albums. After that, we renegotiate. It's a partnership, a real partnership. We're investing in you. We need some protection. You understand that, right?" Jackson set the contract down, didn't push it away, just set it down gently. "No," he said. "It's not a partnership. It's the same deal, just smaller." The guy's face changed. The smile was gone now. "Look, man, I'm trying to help you here. You know what's happening out there, right? You know what they're saying about you? Nobody wants to touch you. Nobody. We're the only ones willing to take a chance. And you're going to walk away from that?" Jackson stood up. "I'm not walking away from you," he said quietly. "I'm walking away from the same mistake." The guy didn't say anything, just watched him leave. Jackson could feel his eyes on his back all the way to the door. Outside, the sun was too bright. The air was hot and dry. Jackson got in his car and sat there for a long time. He didn't start the engine, didn't turn on the radio, just sat there, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. He thought about calling someone, a friend, another musician, someone who might understand. But he didn't know what he'd say. Didn't know how to explain what he was feeling. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even disappointment. It was something deeper, something that felt like grief. He drove home in silence. By the end of June, Jackson Browne's name was toxic. No one would take his calls. No one would meet with him. His manager stopped returning messages. His booking agent dropped him. Radio stations started pulling his songs from rotation, not because they didn't like them, but because the labels that owned the distribution rights told them to. He wasn't blacklisted officially. There was no announcement, no press release. But everyone knew. If you worked with Jackson Browne, you didn't work with the labels. And if you didn't work with the labels, you didn't work at all. His phone stopped ringing. His calendar emptied out. He spent most of his days at home, alone, playing guitar in his living room, writing songs no one would hear. The house was quiet, too quiet. Sometimes he'd drive out to the ocean and sit on the sand and watch the waves come in. He didn't know what else to do. The loneliness crept in slowly. At first, it was just the silence, the lack of calls, the empty schedule. But then, it became something else, something heavier. He'd see people he knew at the grocery store, and they'd look away. Cross the street, pretend they didn't see him, not because they hated him, but because they were afraid of being associated with him, afraid of what it might cost them. His friends started to pull away, not all at once, but gradually. Invitations stopped coming. Calls went unreturned. People who used to ask him to jam sessions or dinner parties suddenly had other plans. Always other plans. One night, he ran into Glenn Frey at a restaurant on the Strip. They'd known each other for years, played together, written together. Sat up late talking about music and life and everything that mattered. Glenn saw him from across the room and their eyes met. For a second, Jackson thought he might come over, thought they might talk. Thought maybe, just maybe, someone would stand with him. But Glenn just nodded. A small, tight nod. Then he looked away, turned back to his table, back to his conversation, back to his life. Jackson left before his food came. He walked to his car in the parking lot, got inside, locked the doors, and sat there in the dark, trying not to cry. Not because he was weak, but because he was human, and humans break when they're alone for too long. The fear came later, late at night, when he couldn't sleep. When the house was dark, and the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant roar of the freeway, he'd lie in bed and think about money, about bills, about how long he could keep this up before everything fell apart. He thought about his mortgage, about his car payment, about the cost of just existing in a city that didn't want him anymore. His savings were running out, not quickly, but steadily. A slow leak that he couldn't stop. He thought about getting a regular job, something outside music, something safe, but what would he do? What skills did he have that anyone would pay for? He could play guitar, he could write songs, he could sing. None of that mattered if no one wanted to hear it. He thought about leaving Los Angeles, going somewhere smaller, somewhere cheaper, somewhere he could disappear and start over. But the thought of giving up, of running away, felt worse than staying. So he stayed, and he kept writing. Every morning he'd wake up and make coffee and sit with his guitar. Sometimes the songs came easily. Sometimes they didn't come at all, but he kept showing up, kept trying, because it was the only thing he knew how to do. The songs he wrote during that time were different, darker, more honest. They weren't about highways or romantic longing or the California dream. They were about isolation, about doubt, about what it feels like to stand alone when the whole world turns its back. He didn't know if anyone would ever hear them, didn't know if they were any good, but he wrote them anyway, because he had to, because if he stopped, he didn't know who he'd be anymore. Weeks turned into months. Summer became fall. The heat broke. The air got cooler. The light changed. And Jackson was still there. Still alone. Still waiting for something he couldn't name. He thought about calling the older man. The one with the gray hair and the cold eyes. The one who'd made the threat. He thought about apologizing. About saying he'd been young and stupid and didn't understand how things worked. He thought about asking for another chance, about begging, if that's what it took. He even picked up the phone once, dialed half the number, stood there with the receiver pressed to his ear, listening to his own breathing. Then he hung up. He couldn't do it. Not because he was stubborn, not because he was proud, but because he knew, somewhere deep and certain, that if he signed that contract, he'd lose something he couldn't get back. Not money, not fame, not success. Himself, the part of him that made the songs real, the part that felt and bled and meant something, the part that people connected to when they heard his music in the dark. If he gave that away, if he let them own it, it wouldn't be his anymore. And if it wasn't his, what was the point? So he waited. And he wrote. And he learned how to live with silence. Then, in late September, he got a letter in the mail. No return address, just his name, handwritten on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a phone number, and a note that said, "Call me. I think we can help." He stared at it for a long time. He didn't recognize the number, didn't recognize the handwriting. He thought about throwing it away, thought it might be a prank, or worse, a setup. Another label trying to lure him in just to humiliate him again. But something about the handwriting felt genuine. The letters were a little uneven, a little human, not typed, not printed, written by hand, by a real person. He called. The voice on the other end was a woman, older, calm. She said her name was Diane. She said she ran a small independent label out of Northern California. She said she'd been following his situation. She said she believed in what he was trying to do. "I can't offer you what the big labels can," she said. "No stadium tours, no national TV spots, no million-dollar marketing campaigns. But I can offer you something they can't. Ownership. Full ownership. You keep the masters, you keep the rights. We just help you get it out there. We handle distribution. We handle promotion. But the music stays yours. Jackson didn't say anything for a long time. He was afraid to believe her, afraid to hope. He'd been hurt too many times, disappointed too many times. He didn't know if he could survive another rejection. Why? He finally asked. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Because it's the right thing to do, she said, and because I'm tired of watching good people get crushed by bad systems. I started this label because I wanted to do things differently. I wanted to prove it was possible, and I think you're the kind of artist who deserves that chance. They talked for over an hour, about music, about the industry, about what it meant to create something real in a world that only cared about profit. Diane didn't make big promises, didn't paint fantasy pictures. She was honest, blunt even. She told him it would be hard. Told him he might never sell as many records as he could have with a major label. Told him the road ahead was uncertain. But she also told him he'd own his work, completely, forever, and that no one could ever take it away from him. Jackson said he needed to think about it. She said to take his time, gave him her direct number. Told him to call when he was ready. He hung up and sat on the floor of his living room. Guitar in his lap. Sunlight coming through the window. And for the first time in months, he felt something other than fear. He felt possibility. They met a week later. A small office in San Francisco. No glass tables. No suits. Just Diane and a guy named Tom who handled distribution. The walls were covered with album covers from artists Jackson had never heard of. Small names, independent voices, people who chose art over commerce. They talked for 3 hours. About music. About integrity. About what it meant to stay true to yourself in an industry built on compromise. Diane didn't try to sell him anything, didn't try to convince him. She just listened, asked questions, wanted to understand who he was and what he needed. When they finally put the contract in front of him, Jackson read every word. Twice. It was short, simple, clean. He owned everything. They took a percentage of sales. That was it. No hidden clauses, no perpetuity agreements, no trapdoors. He asked Diane why she was doing this, why she'd risk her business on an artist the entire industry had labeled as difficult. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. Because the industry's wrong, she said, and someone has to prove it. Jackson signed the contract that day. His hand was steady, his heart was not. 3 months later, he released his next album on Diane's label. It didn't sell like The Pretender, it didn't go platinum, it didn't make him rich. But it was his, fully, completely, every note, every word, every piece of his soul that he'd poured into it. And people heard it, not millions, but enough. Reviews came in slowly, small publications, underground magazines, college radio stations, people who cared more about the music than the marketing, and they understood. They felt what he was trying to do. They heard the honesty in it, the pain, the refusal to compromise. Other artists started to notice, started asking questions, started wondering if maybe, just maybe, there was another way. Jackson didn't become a martyr. He didn't become a symbol. He didn't lead a revolution. He just kept making music, kept playing shows, kept writing songs, and slowly, quietly, the walls that had been built around him started to crack. Not because he fought them, but because he outlasted them. The labels that blacklisted him eventually moved on. New artists, new deals, new battles. Jackson became old news, and in becoming old news, he became free. Free to work, free to create, free to build a career on his own terms. It wasn't the career he'd imagined. It wasn't stadiums and magazine covers and platinum records. But it was real. And it was his. Years later, a young journalist interviewed him for a music magazine. Asked him if he regretted walking out of that room in 1977. If he wished he'd signed the deal and taken the fame and the money and the life he could have had. Jackson thought about it. Really thought about it. He looked out the window of the cafe where they were sitting, watched people walk by, watched the light change. Then he shook his head. "I would have lost myself," he said quietly, "and I don't think I would have ever found my way back." The journalist pressed him, asked him what he meant. Jackson smiled, just a little. "You can give people a lot of things," he said. "Your time, your energy, your music. But you can't give them the part of you that makes it all real, because if you do, there's nothing left to give. You become an echo, a copy, a product, and nobody remembers products. They remember people. They remember the ones who refused to disappear, the ones who stood alone and kept standing." He paused, looked down at his coffee. "I lost a lot by saying no. Money, opportunities, friends even. But I kept the one thing I couldn't afford to lose, and that made all the difference." The interview ended. The article came out. Not many people read it. It was buried in the back pages of a magazine that folded 6 months later. But the ones who did read it understood. And somewhere, in houses and apartments and dorm rooms across the country, young musicians read those words and made a choice: to sign or not to sign, to compromise or to stand. And the music kept playing. Jackson Browne kept writing, kept performing, kept living. He never became the superstar the labels promised he'd be. He never reached the heights that seemed so certain in 1977. But he owned his work, every song, every recording, every piece of art he'd ever created. And decades later, when the industry finally started to change, when artists finally started demanding ownership, when the old system finally started to crack, people looked back at that moment in 1977, at the man who said no, at the contract that stayed unsigned, at the choice that cost everything. And they understood what it meant. Not victory, not vindication, not proof that he was right. Just a reminder that some things are worth more than success. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to give them away, even when it costs you everything. Especially then.